Part 3, unveiling the power of scales in melody, bass, and harmony. Okay, so we've discussed that we're going to 80-20 this thing, and you're going to get started on improvising with our major scale, okay, and then our harmonic minor scale. We're going to mainly focus on just the major scale because the world gets kind of wide and there's a lot of implications and there's a lot of characteristics that we want to make ourselves familiar with. And we don't want to do it with too many different options right now. So today we're going to uncover the 3 elemental zones that I just named: melody, bass, and harmony. And I'm still trying to figure out which is zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. I like to label melody as zone 1 because it's the thing at the top that is the recognizable part of the song. It's the part we sing, the part we hum. And then I go bass as number 2 because if you just play a melody of a song, right, you get those 2 melodic things working together, you pretty much are playing the structure of the song along with the melody of the song. And you've got your conversation, and then you've got your roadmap and where you are in the conversation. And then I like to name harmony as the 3rd element, and that tends to give us the emotion of our music. So first of all, what do you think about those zones? I could label these zones in any different number of ways, because today I'm going to start with the bass zone because it's the foundation of our structure. So you could call bass zone 1 actually, and then you can call the chords bass 2, zone 2, because it's kind of like the swirling life of the music, right? And then you can call melody zone 3 because that's the actual conversation or the content that's happening above the structure. Let me know. You let me know. I'm going to go with bass 1, chords 2, and melody 3, okay? Just for the sake of getting this video done. This is not going to be a lesson in improvisation. It's going to be an uncovering of how we think about it and the tools that we use and our mindset moving forward into improvisation. And I'm going to do that by revealing the parts that we're working with, this little juggling act of 3 zones. And we don't really need to play all 3 at the same time to get music. Let's deal with level 1 diatonic major music, okay? So what I mean by that is we're playing a song without borrowing notes from other keys or creating tension outside of what the key already gives us, okay? So if I play a C chord, right? You see what I just did there? I like those clusters because I'm utilizing just my scale as choices, right? But if I go to a G chord, which means that I'm going to play a G bass, and I'm going to give that sound, or that's the one we usually go after when we are describing chords. But those are all great choices. Okay, that's a form of tension, but that's tension that we're finding within the key itself. I'm not adding notes, I'm not altering chords to get a tension and release effect. It's already baked into the key itself. So that's the level at which we're going to deal with as I'm talking about these zones and the effects that they have and the scale that we're using to connect them all, if that makes sense. So let's start with bass. So what is the characteristic of bass? Well, first, the bass note is the lowest note in the room. It just has to be, okay? And so with our zones at the keyboard, it's going to be the leftmost note that we play if we're utilizing it as a bass tone and not a low chord tone, okay? We, in our mind, know when we're playing a bass tone. And if I'm playing a C chord and I go, and then I go, I've just played a C chord because C is on the bottom here, and I'm utilizing it as a bass tone. So bass tones and then their progressions, those patterns, right? They provide the repeated patterns that we're going to use to improvise over. If you think about a song, they provide patterns that they're going to happen over time in loops. And they go out and they come back, and they go out and they come back. And the bass tones are the ones communicating where we are in that map, in that loop, when we go out and when we come back, okay? They also determine, which I've just mentioned, the perspective of the sound of the music. So if I say I'm going to make this sound, and I play a C, it's a C chord because the bass said so, okay? But if I do this again, now it's an E chord, right? I've just changed the whole perspective. It's that chord or that chord, and I play it in E. Let me do this chord right here, just for fun. What chord am I playing? I don't know, because I'm not playing a bass tone yet. The bass tone names and sets the perspective of the chord. I'm going to choose an A. We get that minor, dark tone, right? It's warm, it's comfy, right? So the bass tone is giving us our perspective, and theoretically speaking, it's giving us the name of our chord. Now, it might make it difficult to name that chord on paper if we have to account for all the different shapes that I like to use when I play chords. But it doesn't matter because we're not thinking about writing this stuff down at this point. We're just thinking about making soundscapes to improvise over. Okay, so how do we use bass notes? Well, they are the roots of our chords. Mostly, okay? But let's just say 98% of the time, especially in level 1 diatonic major music, okay? Where we're not changing keys, we're not changing sounds. We're using one set of notes throughout the song, okay? So the bass note is gonna be our roots of our chords. There are instances where they're not, and I'm not gonna get into that because that's music theory, not improvisation. They come from the key or scale, one and the same. They come from the key or the scale of our music. So the choices that our bass player has to play the song, now of course if we're playing a song, the song is the content of our conversation. It's already written. Somebody wrote this chord progression. We're not improvising chord progressions. We're not coming up with music out of the air as a group of musicians, right? Something is being played, something is known. Our job as a piano player at this point, at this level, is to make additional music, additional sounds, and have an additional conversation with the music that's being already played. So in that music, the bass is going to be derived from a C scale that we're naming C, or this group of notes, okay? The sound is on the strong beats. Basically, when a chord change happens, the bass tone's job is to play on beat 1 or beat 3, okay? So I'm gonna just play a chord progression, a 1-4-5 chord progression, okay? I'm gonna put a little pulse to it, but I want you to notice that the chords and the bass are interlocked pretty tightly so that it shows that we're playing on the strong beats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Got it? So there are some rules for the bass player to play good music. Now that doesn't mean that those are the only times he can play bass and the only times that he can, or the only notes that he can use. Let's say the bass player wants to create interest and you've got this loop. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? That happens. That's up to the bass player, and that's his version of improvisation with the music, how he wants to interpret it. He or she wants to interpret the song. Okay, so that covers the bass zone of our 3 elements. Physically speaking, it's to the left. Okay, it's gonna be all the way to the left. It's gonna be the leftmost note. It's gonna be low in nature, and on an oscilloscope, it's the biggest note in the room. And so it gets the say as to where this song is going and kind of what it sounds like. It sets up the flavor of the tune. It sets up the chord progression, the the loops, right? Very powerful. It's the basis for our music. All right, so now let's move on to harmony or our chords. I like harmony. Chords, we're going to put in the middle of the piano. And as an improvising musician at the piano, there is a sweet spot where chords sound best when you're speaking into music that's being played. And that is right in the middle. Okay? And it's kind of in this area. Okay, you could say that it's like between C and C, but there's no hard rule because it'll start to sound muddy if you're playing voicings like this, way down low. I don't usually play that voicing down there, although it doesn't sound bad. It's a good piano. I'll reorganize those and play it that way. But I'm usually trying to stay right here when I'm playing harmony, right? For the purpose of zone 2 harmony. So chords, they're the clusters, or they're the stacks, or they're the shapes that represent the tonality of the music, okay? They're linked to the scale of the music, just like the bass is. The scale is still in effect for our level 1 diatonic major sounding song or piece of music, okay? It follows the bass progression, or it's linked to the bass progression. It doesn't have to do anything in particular so much just because the bass is moving, okay? So it can take a very strict path, right? Take a very strict path, or it can take a strict triad shape, which we'll go over in a second, or it can add some notes to it to color it, right? Just add some color to it, a little bit of beauty. So it's either going to form verbatim the spelling of the chord for that piece of the moment, or it's going to take on a more impressionistic version and add some color to it and be more elusive, right? And let me show you how that works. Let's say same song. Let's say I like this sound. Right? And I'm not going to just hold the chord down. I'm going to give it some movement. Now, I'm going to do that without the bass tone. I have no feeling of real movement. Like I'm not starting the song and I'm not going through the song. Right? It doesn't feel like we're going anywhere. So let me add the bass. It's pretty cool, right? So this is taking more of an impressionistic, pattern-based approach, but it's still the harmony of the song. And if you have to write it down, you may have to come up with some names to make it make sense to a player if you want somebody to interpret this music for you. Or you just write down the notes and they read it. Okay, so, and it also informs us how to feel along the song, okay? So as we're playing the music, if I play, that gives me one feeling, and that gives me another feeling, right? That was kind of like wedding music. And the first one was like another wedding. Chord notes. They're commonly found by stacking. If we use this method of identifying chord tones, let's call it identifying chord tones, we can extend that method to get extensions, all right? So here we're going to come up with the triads of C. So if I have C in the bottom here, I'm going to play C, and again, we're using C major scale. I call it play, skip, play, and I did come up with this on my own, even though I've actually seen some people say this on YouTube, and I was so excited I jumped up and down because I was told that I was crazy. They said, this is not a thing. We don't play, skip, play. Well, we absolutely do, okay? So let's say we're playing C here. I'm going to go up the scale left to right, and I'm going to play and skip, play, skip, play. That's how we get a C chord in the key of C. Now, if somebody says, hey, play me a D chord, well, we can also ask, what key is this chord in? Because if I play a D chord in the key of C, play, skip, play, I'm playing what's known as a D minor chord. Okay? And it has to do with the distance between the root and the next note called the third, and the next note called the fifth. Okay? So that's my D minor chord. But guess what? I'm still in the key of C. So an E minor chord is also in the key of C, F major, still key of C, G. So we've got all these chords that can be played and named and delineated as we go through the chord progressions. So now, let's look at zone 1 and 2 together. Let's play them together. Let's just play the chords. Okay, now, that's a fine way to play. And depending on what genre you're playing or what you're coming up with, it's fine. You're playing all root positions. What's happening, though, is you're getting a lot of parallel, chunky movements, okay? So what I like to do, I prefer the method of I like playing in the key of C while letting the bass do the movement. So this is kind of one approach that we can use playing zone 1 and zone 2 together, okay? Let's come up with another one. Let's get crazy. It's just like, oh, right? Some of us do not like that sound. Some of us do. Some of us listen to Radiohead. Now, I know it feels like I'm using nonsense, but what I'm doing is I'm opening up my options, okay? Because there are ways that I can make what I just did in my approach, make it sound like really interesting music. There is one note called the avoid note, and that is the fourth tone of the scale when we're playing certain chords, okay? There are ways in which I can, right? That sounds better because it sounds more like music we're used to. It sounds better, but who's to say that that's not better? You be the judge, okay? It's up to you what you like to listen to. But that's C. That's definitely a C sound. Cool? Notice when I'm playing C down here, sometimes I'm reaching up and I'm playing a chord tone, the third. Okay? Sometimes I'm operating in the middle section with both hands while my pinky is hitting a C. That's me playing in two zones at once and my left hand straddling zone 1 and zone 2. Just kind of reaching up and filling in the space. Look at all that space I have. I've got all this space here. I'd like to balance that out a little bit. The best thing I could do is reach up and grab that. We've heard this lick, right? If you know that old song. I think there's some new songs that utilize that same little bass lick. 2, 3, 2, 3, right? And it's really cool because you're playing roots and thirds, and that's all our mind needs to hear the sound of that chord. Cool? All right, so far we've got zone 1 and zone 2, and they're both linked by the scale. Now, do some shapes work better than others? Yes, and we'll discuss that in further detail in other videos. In specific chords, specific tension and release, specific reasons why we apply different things to the music to get a little mind blow effect or surprise and delight, as I like to call it. But right now, we're just sticking to today. The key of C applies to our whole song, and it's all connected all the time. It's an important platform to understand. It's the basis of how we make music that breaks the rules, okay? Because that's what I like to do, is break the rules. But I want to know how we get there in the first place. Great. So now, let's go to what we're going to call zone 3, melody. All right, so what's a melody? I'm going to go ahead and read this off the screen here. Single tones in sequence, moving up and down in rhythm and various intervals. Makes sense, right? It's known as the notes that we would sing, and they provide the conversation and its various inflections, right? So we can only sing one note at a time, and that's the essence of a melody. They can be tightly linked to the chord tones or the chord notes as arpeggios, right? They can arpeggiate one note at a time, the notes that we would play all at the same time for a chord. So if I played a C chord, I could make a melody of, right? I've arpeggiated them, but it isn't a melody if I'm playing two at a time. I've got to play one single note, just like our voice. Some of us can sing chords, not on purpose though. Or they're relatively tied to the scale of the key, regardless of bass notes and chords. Now this is a cool concept. So either way, they do come from the scale. But let's talk about how melody is not tightly linked to the chord itself. Well, there's a concept that I like to call the home tone. It's called the tonic of the key, or the home note, or the home tone. So if I'm in the key of C, and we've already established that this is the sound of home, so when we hear that, we know that's either the end of a phrase or the end of the song, okay? It's the bottom of our funnel. If I want to, I can kind of use C as my magnet tone and work out from there. Now what I like to do is I don't think of C as the first note of a scale. It's not the first note of a scale in this case. Neither is it the bottom note of my note choices that I'm going to use. I hear it and use it and see it as the middle of a spectrum of notes that I'm going to use in both directions. Which notes? C major scale, right? So let's say we're getting chord changes. Now, if I want to create a melody, I'm going to reorganize that so I can grab this melody up here. Right? I'm not outlining any chords. I'm using scalar motion, right? And I'm just deciding that that's what sounds good. So we have the freedom to either be very rhythmic and regimented or carefree as the rest of the music rolls along. So if I wanted to be regimented with a melody, let's say I'm playing this chord progression, but it's a very rhythmical chord progression. So let's say it's kind of a Latin thing. Okay, so that's really regimented and it's really spelled out and it's really rhythmical. Now I could do the same thing. Now what I'm going to do is attempt to play time over here and kind of sing over the bar line, so to speak. Here it comes. So I can use this as a way to link everything together, or I could just use it as a way to break away and feel the freedom of being a melodic instrument. So we've played bass with chords. Bass with chords is really super useful when you're accompanying a vocalist or an instrumentalist, and that could be yourself. You could be the vocalist. I don't know if you could be the instrumentalist unless you're playing piano and accompanying yourself as an instrumentalist. So that's how you could be an instrumentalist, is you're playing the melody in the melody zone, but you've got to juggle those three zones. So zone 1 and zone 2, great for accompaniment, okay? Zone 3 and Zone 1, bass and melody. It's a nice melodic game that you can play. It feels like a little melodic game. Two things are singing at the same time. They're both single note elements. So it's a very light and feathery and transparent approach to playing music. And it can be fun and playful, okay? And then this other zone here, this is when you're playing along with other musicians, and we play chords in the left hand and melody in the right hand. So this would be like playing zone 2 and 3. And this is really useful for when you're playing with a bass player. When you've got a bass player doing this, right? Doing those things gives us some freedom if we understand how to form a good chord using good principles, right? Making it sound like music that people have heard before, making it accessible. Okay, now it doesn't sound like it's making a lot of sense or really being very defined in the chords. That's because it doesn't have to, because who's really defining the chord sound and who's really defining the map of the song? It's the bass player. So we're not hearing that, right? But if what I was playing is this, pretty cool, right? Okay, so then we can play zone 2 and zone 3 when we're playing the melody of a song and we're accompanying ourselves with a chord, and our left hand is sort of singing along with us, per se, and the bass player is taking care of the bass notes. It also works when you might be playing left hand bass along with a band, hopefully not getting in the way of the bass player, but more supporting that part as a piano part. But when you go to take a solo, you have a choice to continue to play that riff. Maybe it's a bass line riff that you're playing, and then you've got to be creative and play music and split your brain into two parts. Or you can just come up here and play chords while your left hand sings along with your right hand, right? And you're kind of staying out of the way of the bass player, but you're getting to play melodies and you're getting to play chords. Okay, so we've played bass with chords. We've played bass with melody. Now we've played melody with chords. I think that's the 3 combinations, right? So if you really want to get good at something, try to have a device, use technology to play bass and harmony, right? There are things out there that you can do that with, and just practice playing melodies using the scale of the music to level 1 diatonic major music, right? The whole song is connected to a scale. We're not adding any tension. And we're just learning how to move along the path of the scale in a musical way. Okay? Now, you can also do the same thing. You can break up your chord zone and decide what chords you want to play. And you can start with triads, and you can and start adding color tones, and then start playing clusters. Play around with clusters. So you can play the chords in these triads, you can play them in these clusters, right? But essentially we can use the whole scale to get the sound that we're going for, right? And then the same thing with bass lines. You can just kind of practice framing the song in your mind. This is really super important because as an improviser, you've got to imagine the song running in your head, and you kind of got to know where you are in the song. You're improvising to structures that are going by that are invisible, right? They're happening in the auditory realm, but their names aren't going across the screen, right? But you could be reading a chart and you could be seeing chord symbols, and that's what helps you get there. But you've got to understand the sounds of what's going to happen before you get there so that you can anticipate those sounds and work with them and play them in a musical way. So just practicing bass lines is a great way to understand what the purpose of bass is and the power of what it does to your music as you're playing, so that when you reach down to play it, it's in a good context. You're not just going there because it's a habit that your left hand does, but you're actually making musical sense. And that's the combinations of zones that we can balance, we can work with, we can isolate, or we can juggle, all three. And all of those take time and dedication to hone in, depending on what you want to do as a piano improviser. What I want to help you discover is that we can have a lot of fun improvising music at the piano if we take this idea that, well, let's say a piece of music is tied down by a major scale, okay? But sometimes there are other chord changes that come in, or other notes that aren't in the scale, and they create tension and they create beauty. And so the question is like, well, Chris, what about all those other scales that you just showed me? Like, what do I do with those? What are the purpose of that? How does that land in this key of C song? In some cases, the song itself provides it to us, okay? And here's an example. If I'm going to play, say, a C to an E minor to an A, okay, in the key of C, so that A is a minor. Now, it might be that the person who wrote the song doesn't like the sound of the minor and decides, as a composer, he wants to change the quality of the E chord. If I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, E is preceding A, okay? In that case, you can turn that chord into a dominant style chord, or you can take it from a minor and make it a major. Why would we do that? Because it creates tension and leading tones, which is pleasurable in music. So now I've got this sound. To this sound. Okay, G sharp. That was the note that I've imposed upon this song that's in the key of C. So G sharp. G sharp is what we used to add tension and release, okay? We got G sharp to land on an A, okay? That's kind of the sound that's happening that's creating the tension and the release. One more time. Cool, right? It creates a little more emotional drama. It pulls at you a little harder so that when you release here, you can go back to the top and do it again. Great. So now in this case, if you've been following along and you come across that second chord, an E major something or an E dominant 7 something, really all I see this as is the C scale, right? The white notes. And then I'm pivoting something. Okay, so what am I using here? I'm using that pattern. So let's go with, okay, so let's say it's that pattern right there. Well, really what that is an A harmonic minor scale. Major, harmonic, okay? Just like our 2 tetrachords. So in order to include that G sharp, now I've created the environment where it includes the G sharp. And now not only do I just have, right, I don't have to just arpeggiate E7 when I get there. Which doesn't sound bad. In fact, it sounds great. If we're playing a pop tune, it totally works, right? But what if we wanted to use a more scalar motion, right? I just wanted to be more flowy and less arpeggiaty. Well, now I know what I can play. What are my options, right? Okay, this would be the E version of this scale, okay? Or the E mode of this A minor harmonic scale, right? So now let's see if I'm here. That's interesting. I just thought of it in the reference of this scale here. Right? And it starts to sound a little like jazz, but you don't have to use this for jazz. You can really just use it for runs, right? Okay, so you can use those as your target points. I use a little grace note in there, right, to put some flavor on it, but I am still using that A harmonic minor scale in this sense, right? Let's use another one. Let's go C. Okay, so I just played C to an F to a D, but instead of making a D minor, which is in the key of C, right? This is like level 2 major music. Now that becomes a major third, and there's a C implied in there, right? So I'm now using a scale that the only change here is F sharp. So I'm using all white notes with an F sharp. Well, can you think of a scale that we play that has white notes with an F sharp? That would be G. Okay? But again, if we think of it as G to G, we're not going to make much musical sense. We want to still think in the key of C. So if I'm improvising, so at that moment, when I play the D, 1, 2, 3, 4, for those 4 beats, whatever I would play would be within a G major scale. And the G major scale shares 6 out of 7 notes with C. So it doesn't mean that you have to rush to the F sharp to get that. You can, and you'll hear that it sounds good, right? But you don't have to. So that's how we now use a scale and insert it into a song when we're adding tension or when the song itself brings tension and release. What do we do with that? That's what we do with it. We start figuring out what would be the scale that I can impose over this that includes that cool note that's in that chord that changes the feeling of that song. Now what I want to do is I want to show you how to take 2 major scales, 2 unrelated major scales, and I want to make a piece of improvisational magic with them. And I want to show you how to do it, and I want to enjoy it along with you. Okay, so I'd like to take you on a little journey where I'm playing all 3 zones in my 2 hands, and I'm going to utilize 2 scales, 2 major scales that are seemingly unrelated, okay? So let's just see what happens when we mix one sound going to another and then coming out of that and coming back, okay? I will prep you with this. The purpose of changes, let's call them, chord changes, I like to call them sound changes. When we start borrowing notes from other keys, what we're doing is we're opening a doorway to another set of sounds or another sequence of notes that come from another scale, and it changes the landscape for the moment. And what does it do? It affects our emotion in some way. It's going to cause us our emotion inside. It's invisible, but there's a feeling there that you get like, ooh, I like that part. And then it resolves back and it puts you back where you were. So let's play with that idea. So I'm gonna start by playing nonsense in the key of C, and then I'm going to take the 75% mark or the 50% mark or whatever and just change it to E flat major, and then I'll make my way back to C. And then that'll be my pattern, okay? So let's just say I'm here. All C. Got there early. C major, E chord, E flat major, what am I playing? I'm playing like an E chord, okay? E something. I can see it as a C over E, okay? And I'm coming up here and I'm helping out in the harmony zone. And here's my melody. Here's my bass. Here's what I'm doing in the middle. And not everybody's hands are the same size, so you can't all do this. But let's say I'm doing it here. Okay, what did I do? I played a bass note and I changed to F. I'm still in the key of C, by the way. That was my melody because it's all the way over there and they're my single notes, and so I'm utilizing them as melodies. And in here, I'm just kind of, you know what I'm saying? So let's do it. Up to F, climbing up to G, to A. Now I'm going to change to E flat major. Hear it? You can hear it. It's like, oh yeah, that's the next part of the song. And I'm not even playing the chord that I meant to play. The chord that I want to play is an F chord. That means I'm going to play F for the bass. Okay? And I'm going to climb up. And then I'm going to play like a D. Pretty fun, right? So that's how I'm making this song. And you heard this song at the beginning, before part one, in the intro. That's the song that I was playing. I'm taking C major and taking sounds, bass lines from C major, chord shapes from C major, melodic ideas from C major, and then as the landscape changes, I just shift my gaze to E flat major and play the sounds, bass notes coming from that. And I've decided what they're going to be because I like them. So let me do it again. Here's another thing I can do. So I like this movement. Ooh, that's cool. What did I do? What did I do? In my bass note, I wanted to create a note of tension that gets me closer to my target. Yeah, right? It resolves right there. But by introducing this G sharp, just like we did in that other example of introducing a G sharp, what am I bringing into my moment there? How long does that moment last? It's only 2 beats. 1, 2. It's only one beat, right? If I think of 1, 2, 3, 4, it's a 1, 2, 3, 4. But listen to what just happened. I get a whole nother set of sounds. So what is it? It's the A harmonic minor. I get that. Now I'm not going to have time to run all that. I'm not going to play a melody that goes so that I can just spell it all out. It's just that that's the option that I have at the moment, wherever my hand happens to be. So let's hear how it sounds. E. Ooh, what's that one? That, okay, that's another scale, right? So whenever I introduce a new note, then I stop and I go, ooh, what would that be? That would be some kind of a harmonic minor or one of those major harmonics or minor harmonics, right? I go through my little set of tetrachord scales that I do and I think, well, what would that be if I was here? Kind of like an A diminished chord, right? And this brings up another scale altogether that we didn't cover today, but I'm going to move on. All E flat, B flat 7 something, E flat major stuff, D minor stuff back into the key of C, right? So this is how we can create scapes. Even if it's not that sophisticated, right? I like to play sophisticated music, but even if it's not that sophisticated and I want to just kind of, I like that E chord. It's a great little improvisational exercise. And at whatever level you're at, you can play along. You can play zone 1 and zone 2, bass and chords, and just kind of experiment with the sounds you can make. Okay? And then go into and experiment with those sounds. Same thing with your melody. You can create a bass note and you can go along the C scale, and then you can change a bass note and decide, I'm in the key of E flat now, and then just start playing the key of E flat. Just notice the changes that are going to happen in your music in your time of, call it, improvisational meditation. And it's one of my favorite things to do. So now you know you can sit and you can combine a major scale and experiment within that sound, but you're not going to get those emotional hits, that dopamine hit, that surprise and delight, that blow your mind moment, that ooh, right? That tension and release. You're not going to get that stuff until you change the sound of the music, which means switch scales. And then your job will be to start putting puzzle pieces together. Think of improvising at the piano as your process, your personal puzzle that you're putting together. This is all usable, any style. So I hope you learned a lot. If you loved it, you know what to do. We're on YouTube. So I really hope you enjoyed this series. I really enjoyed. So I will be making shorter videos that are more specific, that answer more specific questions. And I'd love to hear from you so that I'm making videos that I know you're going to engage with. I'm Chris Barron. This has been Scales and Tetrachords and the 3 elemental zones. Stay creative.